This is the story of Delta Airlines Flight 1141. On the 31st of August, 1988, a Delta Airlines 727 was on a hop from Jackson, Mississippi to Salt Lake City, Utah, with a stopover in Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The jet departed Jackson at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The jet was in great shape except for one fuel gauge that was inoperative. The flight to Dallas was all but ordinary, and the first officer had no trouble getting the plane on the ground at Dallas. While on the ground at Dallas, the first officer and the captain worked in the cockpit while the second officer performed his walk-around duties. He too noted the inoperative gauge, but this was okay as Delta's minimum equipment list permitted them to fly. While the plane was on the ground, a Delta agent was using a dipstick to figure out how much plane the fuel had on board in the number 1 tank. The tank did not have a functional gauge, remember? He noted that 1,036 gallons of fuel needed to be added so that the number 1 tank would be at 1,597 gallons at the end. This is about 10,700 pounds of fuel. The number 3 tank was also ordered to be filled up to the same level as the number 2 tank, which was filled up to 10,600 pounds of fuel. The fueler went and told the crew that he had filled the tanks to the requested levels, but as he was talking to the pilots, he noticed that the gauge for the number 2 tank was reading 500 pounds heavier than what he was expecting. He brought this to the attention of the second officer. The second officer then got the fuel slip, weather briefing, and ate his information. Then the plane pushed back. But Dallas was a busy airport, and it would be a while before they got airborne, so the captain decided to shut one of the engines down to conserve fuel. Then, when the plane was number 4 in line for takeoff, the first officer made an announcement that they were about to take off, and they brought engine number 3 back online. Then the controller said, "Delta Airlines 1141 taxi in a position, runway 18 left and hold." With that, Flight 1141 instantly became the number 1 aircraft for takeoff. They got to bypass all the other planes that were waiting. The first officer acknowledged the transmission. The pilots then lined the jet up with the runway and pushed all 3 engines to takeoff power. The 3 engines spooled up to takeoff power, and the second officer noted that the auto-pack trip arming lights did not come on for this takeoff. But that wasn't super important for this takeoff, so the second officer kept that to himself. The jet picked up speed and they hit rotate. Right as the jet took off into the skies of Dallas, the captain or the first officer called out, "Engine failure." The right wing dropped. The captain was fighting his plane. The plane wanted to pull to the right like a reverser had deployed or something. The captain tried all that he could to stabilize the plane, but his actions were in vain. The jet started to strike the ILS antenna of the runway. The jet then crashed just short of the runway. Out of the 108 people on board, 14 people did not make it. Right off the bat, it was clear that something was off, way off with the plane. Witnesses on the ground noticed that the plane took off normally, and then right as the plane started rotating, things started to go wrong. You see, people had seen sparks and flames from the engines. The investigators tried to get all that they could from the witnesses, but they could not remember where the flaps were or anything like that. They just didn't get a good enough look at the plane to be able to ascertain anything like that. But the runway told them more. The first mark that the plane made on the ground was the tail skid dragging along the ground, meaning that Flight 1141 was struggling to get off the ground. In a desperate attempt to gain altitude, the plane dragged its tail on the ground. The tail struck the ground 4,990 feet from the departure end of the runway. What they found interesting was that the ground between the departure end of the runway and the crash site was scorched. Once the investigators were able to get their hands on the recorder data, they were able to put some cold hard numbers to this takeoff. The captain began rotation at 131 knots, which was the correct speed, and this plane should have been able to take off at 144 knots. But the actual speed of takeoff was 158 knots. This pointed to a plane that had some serious performance problems. Once the plane was airborne, it was struggling to slip the surly bonds of Earth. In addition to that, they found the stick shaker went off right after the plane took off. As the stick shakers were going off, the nose of the plane rose a bit, thus disrupting the airflow into the engines, causing compressor stalls. So now, the one question is, why was the lift of the plane so low that it could barely get off the ground? Did a badly timed wind shear hit the plane, robbing it of its lift, or did something else happen? Or was there some aberration on the wing that destroyed the lift? Did the spoilers come out? The answer would need a lot more investigation. They looked at how the acceleration of the plane changed during the takeoff. Then they realized that none of these scenarios fit with the acceleration that they were seeing. They came to the sobering realization that if the plane flew like it did, then the flaps and slats were probably not extended all the way. But the post-crash fire destroyed the plane so badly that they were not able to verify the position of the flaps and slats. So now, with this being their main culprit, they had to put the 727 back together. In the cockpit, the flaps handle was found in the 0-degree detent. That's it, right? Case closed? Well, not really. You see, the handle could have been moved in the rescue operation because the flap handle had to be raised and then moved to the 0-degree detent and then pressed into a gate to end up in the 0-degree detent. While it's unlikely that this happened during the evacuation or the rescue, we can't be 100% certain. They then started listening to what was happening in the cockpit as they were getting ready to rocket out of Dallas. They tried to correlate the sounds that they were hearing to the sound of the flap lever being moved in the cockpit. Only one sound resembled the sound of the flap lever being moved. This was after they had restarted engine number 3. But the thing is, that sound could have also been explained by other regular cockpit activity. But this voice recorder gave them some insight into how things were at the time of the takeoff. They thought they were number 4 in line for takeoff, and then all of a sudden, right as engine number 3 was coming back online, they were number 1 for departure. This marked a change in the behavior of the pilots and how they accomplished tasks. Till then, they had been pretty orderly, but after the announcement, they were rushing to get this plane into the air. Part of getting the plane ready for takeoff was ensuring that the flaps were out. So the second officer prompted, "Flaps," to which the first officer responded with 15-15 green light within a second of the challenge. There were no sounds in the cockpit that they could hear that would suggest that a visual confirmation was made or that the flap handle was moved. At the hearing for this crash, the pilot said that they would have instinctively checked the flaps handle when the call-out was made, but no one ever recalled actually checking the flaps lever. The thing is, there have been other incidents where a checklist call was made for flaps 15 and the pilot responded that the flaps were at 15 when they were actually at 25. The thing is, these checklists are so repetitive that you fall into a habit of saying okay and clear just because most of the time they are okay and clear. But what confused the investigators the most is not what they heard, but what they didn't hear. The 727 had a takeoff warning system. The takeoff warning system is designed to give the pilots an oral warning when the number 3 engine throttle is pushed past a certain point and if the trailing edge flaps are not extended. This leaves us with 2 possible options. Number 1, the flaps were set and were retracted at or right before takeoff. Number 2, the takeoff warning switch malfunctioned. Let's dive into option number 2. When the number 3 throttle is pushed past a certain level, a switch actuator is triggered which completes a circuit, thus arming the system. On site, they try to see if the connections were being made in the actuator. They move the actuator with their fingers. The first 2 times, the arming circuits did not close, meaning that the takeoff warning system would not have been armed. On their 3rd attempt in the field, it did arm. To get a better idea of what was happening, they decided to tear the device down to see what was happening on the inside. They noticed a blue-green corrosive substance on the terminals. They sent all of this to Boeing, and Boeing came to the conclusion that a misactuation probably did not occur here, as there would be scoring marks on the switch. But the corrosion on the terminals would have affected the electrical conductivity of the switch. The investigators called the switch, quote, hit or miss, meaning that there was a significant chance that the switch might not have engaged. The question now is, was the situation salvageable? Right after takeoff, they were at takeoff power, meaning that they still had some performance on the table. The captain said that he had called for full power and advanced the throttles to max power. But the first officer said that that could not have been the case, as the captain had both of his hands on the yoke, counteracting the rightward yaw. Moreover, Delta's procedures called for max power and for the nose to be held at or near 15 degrees of pitch, and for all stall warnings to be respected. That was not the case here. When the stick shakers went off, the captain did not lower the nose enough to prevent the oncoming stall, meaning that there were more things that the crew could have done to prevent this accident. The thing that this crash is really known for is the CVR. Here's an excerpt of the CVR. Quote, We forgot to discuss about the dating habits of our flight attendants so we could get it on the recorder. In case we crash, the media will have some juicy little tidbit. End quote. The cockpit was very social right before takeoff, and the captain should have reined it in as soon as possible. But he didn't. I'm going to play the entire CVR for you right now so that you can make your own decisions.
We forgot something on our first leg today. We forgot to discuss about the dating habits of our flight attendants so we could get it on the recorder, in case we crashed, then the media would have some kind of a juicy
is that right? Oh, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that Continental that crashed in Denver. Did you read that in the news?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, they were talking about the dating habits of one of the flight attendants. They had a real nice laugh, We got to leave something for our wife and children to listen to.
We were just talking yesterday, about 191 seems to be the classic airline crash that the news media goes for every time, And here, that DC, that was a crash due to weather and all that. It wasn't guys goofing around. American's DC-10 up in Chicago was due to faulty maintenance. The airplane flipped over on its back and crashed, killed more people. You never hear about that. Shoulder harness. They're on. 15 green light. Flight control. Cross bottoms are checked. Nav instrument. They're set. Engine failure. We got an engine failure. We're not going to make it. 1141. Full power.
Flight 1141 was doomed by the flaps not being put out, and then by not adding enough power. If something in that pipe plate had been different, the plane would have been able to fly away. But alas, they didn't. Let me know what you think of Flight 1141 in the comments below. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.